Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So today I'm going to talk about heroes once again. And I'm going to talk about heroes in light of a recent Time magazine article entitled, "We are re-examining how we portray cops on screen. Now it's time to talk about superheroes." And by the way, I'll link this in the description so you can go and read the article for yourself if you wish. And if you look at the main body of the address of this article online, it is defunding-police-superheroes-on-screen. So that gives you some idea of what this article is about. Now, I'm just going to look at this article in order to springboard from it into the larger ideas that it brings out. But as usual, when I look at an article, I'm going to look at not just what is expressed within the article itself, but how it is presented and where it is presented, because those things are as important as what is actually said, especially when you're dealing with these quote-unquote progressive people who are trying to hide or obfuscate what they actually mean within their articles. So the author is trying to say that because in her mind, they've already established that the cops are corrupt and need to be defunded, and heroes, superheroes especially, are just cops in capes. Therefore, we need to radically reorganize the entire way that we deal with the portrayal of superheroes. Now, first of all, what the author presents is not actually an argument. All it is cherry picking very specific things from comics and from movies to try and prove the point. And of course, because of this cherry picking, the article is ignoring mass swaths of information that actually contradict what the article is trying to say. To give you some examples, it takes The Watchmen, and it says that the original Watchmen story was a portrayal of heroes as they actually are, corrupt versions of cops. Ignoring, of course, the fact that when Watchmen came out, it was radically different from anything else and the way that heroes were portrayed at that time. It also looks at Into the Spider-Verse and says that because of the success of that movie, it shows that Miles Morales, the black version of Spider-Man, should actually take over from Peter Parker because obviously people want this. It looks at the Punisher and says that the Punisher symbol has been appropriated by cops and by the military in a way that should never have been done, which is something I just covered about 2 weeks ago in its own video. So what the author is doing is she's basically taking a whole bunch of mismatched things, throwing them all against the wall, and hoping that something sticks. And her conclusion is very much like her beginning, because she assumes right at the beginning that the cops need to be defunded because, of course, they are corrupt. And that progressive stance leads right into what she thinks should happen to the superhero universes, whether they be within the comics or within the movies. That they themselves need to be fundamentally reorganized, and to be fundamentally reorganized in these ways. Number one, to give the reins of all of this creation over to black creators. Because, of course, the bigotry of low expectations is a progressive staple. And the secondary thing that she promotes, I find very odd. What she is calling for is to get rid of what she calls the strictures of outdated intellectual property. Basically calling for people to ignore the laws of intellectual property and for progressive creators to simply take characters from no matter where they find them and use them for their own means, in her words, to weave new stories with new politics and new perspective. So that's the article itself. Let's move on to the reason for this article actually existing. So first of all, if you look online and look at Time's Twitter and how they posted this on Twitter, it was severely ratioed. Almost every last single comment on their tweet was negative, saying this is ridiculous and simply mocking this article. So the question for me becomes, why in the world would they put this article out there? Do they not understand that it's going to be mocked severely? Well, first off, I'll freely admit that they simply might not understand that this is a ridiculous concept. But secondly, I would say that the reason why they're putting this out there is for it simply to be out there no matter whether it's being ridiculed or not. This is something that Ta-Nehisi Coates talked about, Ta-Nehisi Coates being the current writer of Captain America. He talks a lot about slave reparations, and someone asked him at one point, do you actually believe that you're going to bring about slave reparations? And he said, no, I don't believe that at all. It's not my purpose to bring about these slave reparations. He said it's simply not going to happen within his lifetime. Someone else is going to have to bring that about. What he tries to do with all his articles and all his presentations is to simply make the idea mainstream. He said that the idea at first was severely ridiculed, and he simply wants people to stop ridiculing the idea and actually take it seriously so that they can have a discussion. And by the way, while I would denounce the ridiculing of an idea simply because it is expressed, I would have to also say that if an idea is actually ridiculous, if you look at it in accord with reality and it makes absolutely no sense, it deserves to be ridiculed. But I think that's what's going on with this article itself. These people know that they're going to receive a bunch of ridicule for this article. But the point is more to take this idea and put it into the mainstream. Because again, the format within which this is published is Time magazine. It is something for everyday people. And so they want to insert this idea into the minds of the everyday people that this is not a ridiculous idea, but it is a mainstream idea. And the reason why they want to cement it in the minds of the public as a mainstream idea is because if you accept their premise that looking at superheroes, they need to be restructured according to a new progressive idea, then you automatically accept what they take for a given as the premise of this article, which is the fact that cops, as part of the judicial system, are part of a systemic racism, which would be the progressive way of saying an evil system. And this is stressed by the fact that this is a rhetorical argument. It's a rhetorical argument that is leading you to one answer. It never actually gives you any other point of view than the progressive point of view in this article. It never goes outside of the bounds of progressivism at all. And it never gives you any solid basis for argumentation at all. As I said, it's just throwing things up against the wall, hoping something sticks, and cherry-picking little things out of a mass of information. And in my estimation, the real reason for this article is to cement in the minds of the reader that systemic racism is actually a thing and that you should not question it. Because, for this article, that's in the background. That's their assumption. Which leads me to a point about progressivism that has been around for a long time now. I have seen people criticize this as long ago as the 1960s, where they talk about the fact that argument in this new system, this progressive system, is being replaced by word. Now, what do they mean by that? Well, they mean that these progressive people are taking words and they are applying such a massive amount of power to these words that you can no longer go behind those words to seek their actual definition. Words like racism. If you question what racism actually means, you'll simply be called a racist, and therefore any discussion is automatically over, and therefore no actual argument can ensue. Because a real, rational, and logical argument takes every word, it looks at the definition of every one of them, and it sees if they coincide with each other to make sure that this argument is actually cohesive and the point made is in accord with reality. But if you take words and you cement within them such power so that no one can look behind them, you cannot have actual argumentation. No, everything comes back to one word, and you got to stop there and you got to accept that definition as it is given, or else you will be destroyed. And this is one of the main reasons for political correct language. It is to institute power into certain words so that you can no longer use argumentation. You can only stop at that powerful word. Words like racism. And articles like this are instituting that power in a backdoor way into the phrase of systemic racism. They're saying that if you question that systemic racism actually exists or its definition, you are racist, and therefore you must be destroyed. You must be ignored. You must be laughed off of the platform. So what does this all have to do with heroes? Well, here's the thing. What these progressives try to do is that in the beginning, they take their progressive ideology and they insert it into something that is actually healthy. And this progressive ideology begins to corrupt a healthy thing. Now, nothing, of course, is completely healthy. We live in an imperfect world, and everything in this world has some kind of corruption in it. Everything will need to constantly struggle to keep its own perfection and move forward towards that perfection. But what the progressives are doing is that they are implementing some kind of corruption into a otherwise healthy system. And they foster this corruption and make it grow to a point where the system itself looks like it's unhealthy. And at that point, they therefore say, look, this system itself is corrupt. This system itself is so unhealthy that it has to be unhealthy from its very inception. Therefore, we have to destroy it and start anew with something that is based purely upon progressive ideology. This, by the way, is all a part of what is known as critical theory. And critical theory was a system instituted by a bunch of Marxist, communist professors where they said to themselves, look, our violent grand revolution that was supposed to be brought about by the workers isn't actually happening. Therefore, we have to institute a new system for the destruction of Western civilization so that we can move into our revolution and then bring about our communist system. And the way that they proposed to do so was to criticize and corrupt things from the inside so much, little by little, that they will eventually look like they're going to topple over, and they will then use their power to simply topple the thing over, destroy it, and start anew with something that is based specifically and only on their communist Marxist ideology. This is all well documented and admitted history for the beginning of critical theory. And why am I talking about that in the middle of this discussion? Well, if you look at this movement that is talking about defunding the police, by the way, it's not defunding the police, it's abolishing the police. If you look at the people who are actually in charge of this movement, they're saying abolish the police. You have all of these people in the media running interference for them and saying, no, they don't mean abolish, they mean defund. And by that they simply mean take some of the funds that you use for policing and put it into these social programs. But no, there was an actual article, I think it was in the New York Times, an opinion piece written by one of the leaders of this movement where he entitled it, "No, we actually mean abolish the police." And this movement, this, we'll call it Black Square movement, because I don't want to get in trouble with YouTube, this Black Square movement, what is it based upon? Well, from the mouth of one of the three people who created this movement, she said that her and one of the other creators of this movement have given it a specific ideological background, and that ideological background is Marxism. Again, this is from the mouth of the person who helped create this movement to begin with. And not only that, but if you go on their website today and look at some of their stated goals, one of their stated goals is the destruction of the idea of the atomic family and the raising of children by the community. So what you see at play here right now is this communist ideology that is using critical theory, and it has been for some time now, to chip away and corrupt the basis of these systems, and that would include the system and the idea of hero, to corrupt it in a way to make it look like it always has been corrupt, and therefore now say that, well, look, since it's always been corrupt, we should just kill it and start anew and fresh and healthy with something that is based specifically upon progressive ideology. But again, what does this all have to do with the concept and idea of hero? Well, the whole point of this article is that the idea of hero has been corrupted from the beginning, therefore we need to scrap the entire thing. This, of course, is an assumption that the idea of hero has never been healthy to begin with. And by the way, what these people mean by corrupt to begin with is the fact that it was never perfect, because these people are weaned on the idea that they can build a perfect society. And since if they can do that, anything that has ever been imperfect in any way is therefore corrupt, and therefore corrupt from the beginning. But if you look at the actual system of an idea of what a traditional hero is, it worked perfectly fine. Now, it wasn't perfect, because nothing in this world is, but it worked perfectly fine, according to reality and being internally consistent, especially internally consistent with justice. It worked perfectly fine up until it was corrupted by this progressive ideology. There is a very simple and clear explanation of how superheroes can take justice into their own hands and work with the police and still be just. It, of course, is the fact that a true traditional hero, according to Western civilization, is a paragon of virtue, and those virtues need necessarily be there in order for them to be a hero. Those virtues are prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance, and they are preceded by right reason. So this true hero needs to have all of these things to begin with. First of all, he needs to have right reason. That is to say, he needs to be able to employ his reason, to have his reason shaped by reality, so that he can see the situation of what is going on around him correctly. That will lead right into prudence, which is correct decision-making dependent upon his right reason, which leads directly into justice, which is to render to every man what is his due, which then leads directly into fortitude, which is his ability to take that justice and to live it out in the real world, which leads directly into temperance, which is a reordering of all that has come before so that they don't interfere with each other and they don't work at odds. That is to say, you don't have a hero like Batman who is so intent on justice that he does something imprudent and he does something against right reason. Temperance makes sure that all of these things work in harmony. And if all of these things are working in harmony, which necessarily they have to do in order for the person to be a hero, therefore the person is acting according to reality, he is acting justly, and so what he is doing when he is implementing this justice is something that is correct, and therefore can be in accord with the policing system as it exists. Now, just for a moment, let's take all of that and look at it in terms of how this system can be corrupted, because that's exactly what the progressives have done. They've corrupted this system. So the easiest way to think about this corruption is to look at it in terms that each of these things, first right reason, and then prudence, and then justice, and then fortitude, and then temperance, they're all like a series of dominoes, and they all go around in a circle, because you need right reason to lead you into prudence, to lead you into justice, to lead you into fortitude, to lead you into temperance, and temperance backs right up against right reason again, because it reorders everything in a circle once again. So the linchpin, and also the easiest corrupted of all of these things, is temperance. And if you knock over temperance, then it knocks over right reason, which knocks down prudence, which knocks down justice, which knocks down fortitude, which knocks down the rest of temperance, and so the whole thing falls. And the easiest way to corrupt temperance, that is to say, an ordered living of these virtues, is to play upon the idea within the mind of the individual that they are superior in some way, that not everybody is equal in dignity, or that that dignity can be ignored in some way, in some shape, in some fashion. So you have someone who thinks of themselves and their dignity as superior to others, or as others at the very least being inferior to someone. Or you have someone who says, well, look, I can ignore this person's dignity in this little area, or for this little short amount of time. As long as it's limited, I can ignore their dignity there, or just for this little bit. Again, this is a disordered view of the dignity of every human being. The point being that if you cannot acknowledge the simple reality of, first of all, your own dignity and the dignity of everyone else around you as being equal to yours, if you cannot acknowledge that simple reality, which is the basis of your own existence and everything you understand within your own mind, then everything else you look at in reality is corrupted by that idea. You're looking at everything else in reality through a funhouse mirror, distorted and bent according to the distorted and bent idea of what you have about the dignity of others and yourself. Again, whether that be the aggrandizement of yourself, or the looking down at others, or the compartmentalizing of dignity so that it can be ignored in some cases, all of this is disorder that comes from what Plato would call an excessive self-love. And it knocks over that last domino of temperance, which then knocks over right reason. Because, of course, as I said, if you cannot see that fundamental part of reason that is core to our own existence, then you can't see any other reality correctly, and therefore you cannot employ reality to shape your reason correctly. What you will do is take reality and try to bend it to your own intellect, to your own reasons, which is exactly what we see the progressives trying to do over and over again with their implementation of the subjective upon objective reality. And I would say this is exactly what you saw portrayed in the storylines of what we now call the dark ages of comic books, where you had all these dark stories, which was brought about, first of all, by the Watchmen, because, of course, they were corrupted. They were a system of heroes that were corrupted. That was the entire part of the story. They wanted to explore that idea. And that corruption took root in all of the idea of what a hero is, and that intemperance was knocked over, which destroyed the whole circle of the idea of what a hero is. It began to corrupt the entire system of what a hero is and how a hero is portrayed on the page. But I'll have to add that this corruption of this idea of hero on the page was something that was set in motion long before it ever got to comics and superheroes. Because, as this article does, let's take reality and look at it in accord with what we're talking about according to this idea of hero. Well, first of all, the traditional idea of a hero and that system of virtue was also very much implemented within society itself and the law system. If you look at the law system according to this idea of the virtues, it works seamlessly. It is not a broken system. It is not a system that needs to be scrapped because it was always unhealthy. It is a system that works like clockwork. Because up until about 60 or 70 years ago, the laws of Western society were based upon something called natural law. And how did they come up with this natural law? Well, people took their right reason in accord with reality. They took the experimentation of the things they saw around them and then abstracted upwards to a universal. And then once they knew what those universals were, they began to gradually bring them back down to see what the laws are that govern nature and existence and reality, and therefore took those laws and then implemented them within the laws of a society. So if you want to draw a parallel, natural law in the traditional systems of Western civilization is equal to right reason for a society. And then it moves from that right reason of natural law down to prudence. That is to say, how we order our society, how we prudently do so, is the next step downwards, is the overarching virtue of that society. And once that overarching virtue has been established, then you can take that natural law and implement it within specific laws themselves to bring about justice. And once you have those laws based upon justice created, then you can move on to fortitude. That is to say, you can move on to the system whereby those laws are implemented within your society, which would be your policing system. And you can then move on down from the policing system into temperance, which is order for your society. But if we go back and once again look at that article, it purposely ignores all of this. It purposely ignores all of this history, all of this argumentation that can show that, yes, there was a time when this system was healthy. And they ignore it because it's all based upon that black square system. And what is that Black Square movement based upon? Well, as its founder said, it's based upon Marxism. And what is Marxism based upon? Well, one of its bases is the fact that human dignity can be ignored in order to serve the greater community, in order to serve the greater society. And this is why when you have implementations of this system, like say the USSR, they had no problem whatsoever with sacrificing millions upon millions of the lives of their own citizens for the good of their state. And that ignoring of human dignity led to the corruption of everything within their system. But it not only led to the corruption of everything within their system, their call for a system whereby they can build a utopian society bled into the rest of Western civilization, where it got introduced into the minds of the educated, so-called, where they were taught that yes, they could build a perfect society, and by extension that they didn't have to be bound by all of these restrictions to their own actions, which again led to the idea of excessive self-love, where these people said, I don't have to be so-called restricted by any kind of temperance whatsoever. I can do whatever it is I want to do, and that will make me so-called free to enact this utopian society, at the very least within my own life. And this intemperance, as I said, led to a destruction of right reason within the minds of these individuals. And they taught this destruction of right reason to their students, to other people that were around them. And this destruction of right reason led to a very specific spiral downwards. And this spiral downwards began with the destruction of the idea of natural law. Because, of course, the restrictions of natural law, which come from reality itself, were seen as too restrictive to the intemperance that these people wished to enact within their own lives. Which is to say that they corrupted the idea of natural law, of right reason. And once they corrupted that right reason of natural law, then they corrupted the societal makeup, which is your prudence for a society. And once they corrupted that, it moved downwards into the laws themselves. And the laws we see around us today are not based upon natural law, like they were for the vast majority of Western civilization. No, they're based upon things like progressive ideology. And as such, being based upon progressive ideology, they became corrupt laws. And therefore your societal system of fortitude, which is to say your police, will then be implementing those laws, which are to some extent unjust laws. And once those police are seen as implementing unjust laws, well then what happens? Well, what happens is what you see around you today. Disorder. And then you have these progressive people saying, look, this entire system is corrupt. This entire system was corrupt from the beginning. It never was healthy. Therefore, we have to destroy it. We have to destroy it. That is to say, we have to abolish the police and the entire racist system, the entire systemic racist system which it is built upon, and replace it with our own progressive systems. And, as I said, this article is just another piece of the puzzle. It is another piece that is trying to insert power into the term of systemic racism so that no one can ever go behind it and actually get to the argument where they can see that no, this system is not in itself sick and must die. This system is simply corrupted. And what is it corrupted by? Well, it's corrupted by progressivism. And if anyone, no matter what the color of their skin is, wishes to reclaim the true dignity that is inherent within their own being, that dignity that allows you to be a hero, the only thing that you can do is to root out this progressivism in every form and destroy it, because it is nothing but corruption. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like. Hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. Alright, I'll see you later. Bye.